Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we are reviewing the album Yeti by the band Amon, Düül II, and we are being joined by no other than Stone from these reviews. Welcome onto the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's so exciting.
Definitely is. So we'll get right into it after the intro.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So yeah, as I said, today we're gonna be reviewing Yeti by Amon, Düül II. Now, as is customary on this series, we have the favorite bits, but unfortunately, Stone, you're not getting any, but you're gonna tell me them afterwards when we speak about this privately. But for now, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. Episode is pretty special actually, because not only do we have a guest on, we have the lovely Stone from these reviews coming on here, but you might not know this, viewers, but Stone and I were both new to today's album. Okay, usually when I have guests on here, they already know the album. They have some solid background with it, they have some strong opinions, but today we just kind of decided, you know what, we're gonna listen to this album and we'll see what we think of it. So it's gonna make for something very interesting. I'm awfully sure about it. What do you know about this album? Do you know Amon, Düül? Have you been exposed to them in the past? And what do you think of this one?
Well, I mean, I wasn't really familiar with this band at all. I mean, I think I've heard their name once before when I was talking about Krautrock with some other people I've jammed with in the past. And I think one time before listening to this album, I did hear the Yeti improv, which can't recall what I thought about it, but it made for cool background music, so it was kind of a good segue into the rest of the record.
So Amon, Düül are this, seminal band in the terms of krautrock. Some would even say that krautrock was invented, or at least the coining of the name was due to the music made by Amon, Düül II, which, by the way, I up until now did not really understand why they had this, 2 at the end of their name, but apparently this band originates from a commune at the end of the 60s, and it was basically the Amon Düül commune, which focused around creating art and music together. Even like some of the people did not know how to play instruments, but they just kind of created music anyway. And apparently what happened is that around 1969 they were offered a recording contract, and some of the members actually took it and some of the members didn't. The members who wanted to, have a free hand at like what they were making, the music they were creating, decided not to take up that contract, but the rest that did went on to form what we know as Amon Düül I. And they created, I think, like a record that might be the first honestly krautrock album ever. And it's pretty bad, as I understand. It's not that good, and this was only later even more emphasized when Amon Düül II formalized, and they created their albums, which definitely showed of a better proficiency at their instruments and musical capabilities. And today's album basically comes to us a year, if I'm not mistaken, after their debut album, and there's one big difference between the two. Their debut is much more based on things that they used to play live and improvisations, not really distilling their sound quite yet, while this one is definitely much more thought out. The songs, a lot of them are shorter. They've made them more easy to digest, if that's even something that you can say about this one. And they decided to create this double album. Maybe the first side is what you might call the tamer version of Krautrock, the one that is well calculated and well thought out. And then they have the second album just filled with a bunch of improvisations, and it honestly shows the best of both worlds in this case.
Well, I remember going into at first, kind of like it reminded me of Frank Zappa's Freak Out in a way, since it being a double album, and how it starts off with much more accessible tracks, especially the first side with stuff like Burning Sister, and just the whole medley it has with even the weird stuff like Gulped Sonata, which kind of gives you an idea of how far they're going to stretch their music. And then it isn't until you keep going and you get to like Eye Shaking King where you really start feeling like the weight on you almost. And then it goes into the improvs, which for me I kind of think are maybe better than the first disc, just because it's like much more krautrock like, in the sense that it's just like them just jamming over continuously, which can get old for some people, but I think it's balanced out well with the first disc.
I tried taking this album sort of with a grain of salt, knowing that I might not like it inherently, but I did want to see what virtues it did have, because in some sense, Yeti is in the court of the Crimson King of Krautrock. It is the first. It is out there. It set a standard for everything to come afterwards, and that's something I don't want to really take lightly. So of course I gave this one the first listen. It was interesting, but I knew that I had to think it over again, so I listened to it multiple times, and I can definitely say that if there's one standard that Krautrock should always strive to be, it might actually be this album.
No, I agree. I think the production really helps with that too, because like every instrument's pretty clear. Even when it's getting really like crazy and out of sorts, you could kind of hear the bass still, and the guitar tone sounds really nice. The drums sound amazing. Not only the way they're being performed, but just how they sound. And honestly, kind of what you're saying, like with the analogy to In the Court of the Crimson King, I feel like, yeah, this is on the same standard as Toggle Naga in terms of important krautrock records, which, I mean, I feel like it's even hard to compare those two because I don't feel like they sound that similar. I mean, they do have that repetitive nature, though, that krautrock tends to keep, but the songs are really thought out, especially in the first disc, but yet they still keep that space for some like really, I don't want to say traditional krautrock, because krautrock is a lot of different things, which is I like about it. It's hard to kind of pinpoint, even though they do have the repetitive nature. But yeah, I think it does deserve that credibility.
And one of the things I think personally, like when I listen to Krautrock, there's really, you can't, disconnect it from the truth. There are a lot of illicit substances that probably had been taken during the making of this one, during the record of this one. A lot of people listen to it under certain effects, and when it comes down to this one, I feel like I don't get that same effect really with the first album, and that led me wondering, who are they trying to basically appeal to with this first album? Because on the one hand, it does try and make things a bit more contemporary, if you can call it that, with the shorter songs, the more concise compositions. But in another sense, it's still very krautrockish. How would you describe the effect that this album has upon its listener?
Well, if you're doing in the terms of like listening it from front to back, I could see why it would get really not intolerable, but just begin to drag a little, because I feel like with a lot of these krautrock records, especially back in the day on LPs, you would more just listen to it side by side. It's not like a Lamb Lies Down at Broadway where it's like you have to do the whole story. But I do think, kind of like what you said, like side one or the first disc is really concise and the compositions are really strong. I feel like the way they transition into things like flesh-colored anti-aircraft alarm is really subtle. Like it makes you kind of, I mean, if you were just listening to it on headphones, it'd be like, oh, the song changed, like what's going on now? Like, has a constant movement throughout it, which I really like, especially with a song like the Cerebrus, is that how you say it?
Cerebrus, yeah.
Cerebrus.
Yeah.
I love that song too. I love like the instrumentals, even if sometimes it feels like, when I first heard it, I thought it kind of was like padding, almost like we're just kind of waiting for the next song to come on. But I've really gotten to appreciate the instrumentals upon like multiple listens, because this album, like I said, is constantly strong. And I feel like I can see why it's tough to review it song by song because a lot of them do have like a similar atmosphere to them, so it kind of blends together for one piece. But like what they do with it is just really good in my opinion, and just how they ordered it is pretty strong.
Definitely, actually, yeah. Well, I didn't really think about it that way, but the track listing on here is really good. But it's actually interesting now that I think of it. Like, why did you choose this? How we know I gave you free choice, and honestly, why this one?
I remember meeting someone that when I was kind of like jamming with some bands, and we were starting to talk about Can because I'm a big fan of them, and I mean, not to ramble on too much about it, but kind of what you said about it, this being uncompromising is like Tago Maga. Like when I first heard that, I was like, what is this? You know, like this is insane to me, especially with like, you know, the second disc, but I didn't really know where to go after KM. And I remember being suggested Amon Düül 2, and I think it was like their first album, but I didn't really get around to it. And when I saw it on the list, I'm like, cool, because I've seen the cover before of Yeti. So I feel like, okay, this is the time to listen to it. If I've just seen it around myself, you know, maybe I saw it in classic album review as well. I mean, I'm glad I chose it though, because this is definitely another great starting point to more krautrock.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. So personally, I listened to another album by Amon Düül, which for some reason I thought was their debut. I don't know why, I just assumed that, but no, it's called Wolf City, and it comes later on, I think in 1972, so 2 years a gap between the two of them. And you know, in these starting years for Amon Düül, they just released a lot of stuff. They were touring basically every single night. I think they went on tour with Tangerine Dream at the time. You know, they were big stuff, these guys. Yeah, I listened to Wolf City, and it kind of just felt to me, at least that album basically is the first side of this one. It's just your very well thought out tracks which do have a lot of those influences of krautrock. That's an interesting album to say the least. But I think that to really emphasize the importance of this one, we do have to go to the second album on here, the improvisational one, which is Yeti, and then Yeti meets Yogi or something like that. Yeti talks to Yogi. Talks to Yogi, and then of course we have Sandoz in the Rain. So let it not deceive you. While Cerebrus is my favorite singular track from this album, I do think that the second album is generally the better one, actually. And how would you describe like the difference between the sound of Amon Düül from this one to how Can approaches the idea of like creating krautrock?
I mean, comparing the drummers at least, because like I can't remember the name of the Can drummer, but like I feel like he's got such technicality to his drumming pattern, and like he just keeps it constant though. As for this, I feel like there's a little more change, especially like you say if you compare the first disc, but to kind of go on the improvs, I feel like there's kind of to go back to what you were saying about it, I feel like it's hard to be critical about these last 3 songs if you were just listening to them on your own, because I think they're better more as background music. Not to say you shouldn't critically enjoy it, because it's still really good music, but I just feel like it's better just putting on the background, you know, maybe smoking weed, maybe not, maybe just, you know, holding a beer or something. And I think it just makes for good you know, music to chill out to if you're into like that krautrock stuff, because I think it's like a great representation of like krautrock improvisations.
So think of an album like, let's say, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd. Okay, classic pick. When I would compare an album like that to Yeti, I think that maybe one of the main things or main points of difference would have to be this played in the background aspect. Okay, I can definitely put on The Piper at the Gates of Dawn and sit down and listen to it, and not like while I'm doing anything else. I can enjoy the album for what it is. Even Astronomy Domine, you know, like the huge improvisational section, I am all in for it. I can, you know, sit here in my room and just, you know, enjoy the heck out of it. Well, yes, I do feel like there's something about these krautrock bands like Can and like Amon Düül that sort of requires you to not pay too much attention. Just let the music be, and, you know, and coexist alongside it, which might be actually the difference. You know, prog in its essence a lot of the times tries to hit those, strong points and make an impression and be memorable. And, you see it with Yes and Genesis and even Pink Floyd, of course. And suddenly you have an album like this, which, as we talked about, there's only 5 favorite bits out of it. Even those were kind of a stretch for me to pick out because it's just one long experience.
I mean, yeah, to add on what you're saying, I think you make a good point to where, like, they're not trying to make that much of an impression on you with their music. They're just having I don't want to say necessarily in the background for listeners, but I think kind of like, I like the comparison with like Yes and stuff. Like they try to hit those moments like close to the edge, like when it gets to, or like And You and I, when it gets to the like that middle section, like where it really gets you into it, As for like Yeti, the improv, or even like Yeti Talks to Yogi, they're just kind of like letting it do its thing, and like it'll slowly get your attention. I mean, for me at least, I can't speak for everyone, but I feel like Krautrock is more digestible that way when you kind of let it do its thing rather than you try to focus on it so much, expecting more than what you're possibly going to get.
What did you think, or what do you think about this album's cover?
Well, I will admit the only history I could really find about this record was about the album cover, which I guess is a photo of one of their roadies.
Yeah, his name is Falk Rogner. Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, if you are aware, he, I guess, took too much LSD and just slept outside in the cold and died. So this is kind of like a way to commemorate him, yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great photo. It does a great job at like describing the music. I always think a good album cover really enhances the music, whether or not that's just me being biased. Or like I said, it paints the image, especially back then in the 70s, Like you couldn't just like listen to the music before. You had to judge the music by the album cover.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they were smart to have this guy on it.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you don't know the backstory for this one with the unfortunate, death due to hypothermia, it's still a pretty freaking cool cover. Honestly, I don't even know how to approach it. Like I'm looking at it, and of course you don't just have a picture, you have something odd going on. It seems like something really went wrong with the film itself that the picture was taken on. I don't know how they achieved this effect. I know that it was the keyboardist or the organist for the band who actually made this cover or took the picture or something like that. And it's really well made. It just stands out so well, and it's so recognizable as well. I think the only album cover which might be as easily recognizable as this from the Krautrock scene is of course that of Tago Mago. But honestly, I love this one, and I can't even really begin to understand why that is.
Comparing this to like 666 by Aphrodite's Child, I think they both do a great job at like presenting the scary nature of this record, or at least maybe getting the listener into that scary mindset, expecting something dark and grim, which I'd say this record is, with its heavier moments like I said, Eye Shaking King, or like just like Gulp a Sonata. Just even if it's like a minute long, it just really gets you like really eerie. It gets you thinking like, where am I? What image are they trying to paint with this music? And I'd say the album cover fits that image.
Okay, so let's start off. You go. You say, what are your top 3 songs from this album?
My top 3 songs probably have to be Flesh Colored, Anti-Aircraft Alarm, What a Name, and then Yeti the Improvisation, just so cool. Great to smoke weed to, or not if you don't. And finally, my favorite song, as I've already said, is just such a kick-ass song, if it's already to say ass, Eye Shaking King. Just goes so hard. I love the vocals on that. It's just so cool.
Interesting. So I'd have to choose. I think I'd put I'll go with like the opening of Burning Sister if I'm gonna, separate this opening piece. Then definitely the Yeti Improvisation. Really good stuff. Really digging it. And of course, as I said, Cerebrus, just this great folk intense, whatever that is. I really like it. And when it comes to the overall rating of this album, 1 out of 10, how much would you give this one?
Honestly, as of now, I think I give it like an 8. Like I feel like it's still missing something for me to really want to like get something any higher, like a 9 or 10. But like it's super strong regardless, though. Like maybe 8.5 if I had to really like narrow it down.
Personally, I think I'll give it a 7 for now. I think that it was a 7 when I started listening to it. then I listened to it again and it might have fluctuated a bit, but honestly now after several listens, I can say that a 7 is pretty good. To me that means an album which is inherently good and I might come back to, like I wouldn't object coming back to, but it's not something that sticks out of the crowd for me.
Like out of the crowd. I see what you
Out of the crowd. Nice.
I will say that too. Cerebrus kind of has a sea shanties vibe to it, which I like. So it's a good song. But also, I'd say it's a pretty good album to work out to. Like, when I was listening to it, I was just, pumping. Like I said, the first half of this album really got me going. And then the second one, I was like, really feeling it. So yeah.
Interesting.
Just random thought.
But that's about it, guys. I was so happy to have you on here, Stone. So happy. And this is your time to plug anything that you want. So where can people find you and what you create?
Well, honestly, all I could really ask for is if you guys could just hop over to these reviews and just watch all my videos twice. That'd be really helpful. I'd really appreciate it. But if not, you could just subscribe and, keep a lookout if you see any Krautrock coming your way,
Definitely a great channel that focuses on more than just progressive rock. I highly encourage. I love discovering stuff, from your reviews. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. But of course, tomorrow we're gonna be reviewing yet another album, and it's gonna be the album Espacios Intermedios by the band Unter Linden. Now, of course, as usual, I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Clay One, Wrist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys, you're just the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.